Welcome to the SUPfm Podcast Book Club, where we look through a selection of great reading, which are books either directly about paddleboarding or about the water or nature. And if you've been listening for a while, you'll be aware that almost every year I get together with a previous guest on the show to talk through some book recommendations. So if you're looking for a treat for yourself or you're looking for a gift for the paddler in your life, then it's always good to have options. And we'll see if we can't tickle your fancy with some of the books we feature in this, our 2025 Book Club edition. And it's particularly appropriate in this season, which has featured so many of our Canadian brothers and sisters, that we welcome back to the show Dan Rubinstein, who is the author of the fantastic book Waterborne. Dan, it's great to see you again on the SUPfm podcast.
Hi, Simon. It's wonderful to be back here and to be talking to you again so soon. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. And we last spoke back in May ahead of the release of Waterborne, but I've seen you appear quite a bit since then, talking in various venues and environments online about the book. It seems to have been received very positively.
I can't complain about the reception we've had on your side of the Atlantic or here at home in Canada and across the border in the US. The paddling expedition at the core of my book was challenging. The writing was really challenging, but the marketing and promotional side of things is really fun, because I'm basically just talking to people about what I did and why I did it, and all of the amazing people I met along the way. So this is kind of the gravy, part of this long process.
And if people would like to revisit your episode, it was episode 128, and it was a really detailed chat through the journey that you cover in your book. And as a spoiler alert, Waterborne will be one of our recommendations, which we will be talking about later. But first of all, the rules. So we've come up with a short list, and hopefully there'll be something for everyone here. And in addition to giving you a glimpse of the books we're talking about, we'll also suggest the benefits that you or the person you're giving it to will get from reading it. So let's get this started with the first book on our list, which is a new book written by another previous guest on the show, Tristan Gooley. And his book is called The Hidden Seasons. Dan, I know you've come across Tristan's work before.
Yeah, I read one of his previous books, How to Read Water, just when I was kind of getting into paddleboarding, and it really opened my eyes to, all of the hidden clues and signs and the various different types of waterways, and how by paying close attention we can understand what the heck is happening and learn about these natural systems, but also to learn how to safely navigate our way through them. And I do confess, I live a 7-hour drive from the closest ocean, so my knowledge of the sea is still very limited. But I spend a lot of time on rivers and thinking about how to read water. And when I'm out paddling or paddle surfing on our standing waves on the Ottawa River, I'm looking at white water and eddies and currents. I'm thinking about wind in a whole different way after reading Tristan's work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his books are pretty distinctive. In fact, I'm not aware he writes in the same way as he does. The Hidden Seasons is more of a practical nature book, and he's been described as nature's Sherlock Holmes because he's developed the knowledge to recognise and communicate in his books the signs of nature, which are the sort of things that are hidden in plain sight that you wouldn't even recognise unless you know what to look for. And I think most outdoor books generally increase awareness, but this one actually increases behavioural skill acquisition, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think at the core of his work is the idea that, A, go outside, B, slow down, and C, pay attention. And it's amazing what you'll see and discover and ultimately, hopefully, learn if you take the time to go, into nature, whatever it happens to be where you are, and to really, really pay attention to what's going on. I'm amazed at how many people from different walks of life and different circles of mine have mentioned his work to me. So it's not only paddlers or hikers or skiers, but people who just who I don't think of as kind of outdoorsy people have come across his work and really been drawn to it. I think there's something really kind of elemental at the core of it.
Yeah, and the people who write quotes about the quality of his books, there's quite an amazing spread. And one of the most amazing people who've mentioned Tristan Gooley was David Hockney, the artist, because obviously artists, particularly when they're painters or whatever, they have to look at nature in a particular way in order to see everything and represent everything. So I think that was a particularly good quote and a good mention in one of his books, which I'm sure Tristan would have been absolutely delighted with. But going over the contents, some of these things that Tristan talks about are methods used by indigenous peoples or from ancient traditions. Some are ones that he's just noticed and developed himself. But because of the setup of this book, he's essentially produced a calendar of nature signs which have been grouped to the appropriate months of the year, which means that if you want to develop your own skills, you've got a curated set of signs that you can use sort of throughout the year. So just to give an example, and this obviously is Northern Hemisphere specific, so apologies to you in Australia who's listening to this. But obviously in December and November, it's dark, the days get shorter, and in that section he talks about how to find the North Star, which is a fundamental maritime navigational ability, and there's all sorts of different ways in which you can do that. But the key thing is you need to go out there and on a clear night and practice, and if you practice enough, you've integrated those skills, and then you can't not see it once you've incorporated it. And I think that's the trick with his books, because there's so many fascinating bits and pieces. But when I talked to him, I asked him about, how do I incorporate all of these things, and he said, it's kind of a poco, just one at a time in order to get that understanding.
I really like that idea that once you incorporate some of these techniques, you can't not see them or feel them. So once you notice that star, or how certain trees behave in certain winds, or again how certain bodies of water react at different times of year, you're so attuned to that it jumps out at you the second you step outside sometimes, and it's something that was completely unknown and a mystery to you before suddenly makes sense, and suddenly it's everywhere.
Absolutely. And there are a number of different water signs that he's got in this particular book. One of them is, how do you, if you walk down to the sea, how can you tell right there whether or not the tide is rising and falling? And he gives a whole load of clues that you can use right there to identify those sorts of things. And that's just one of the many. There's lots of water stuff in there about the clarity and the visibility of water and all of that sort of stuff. So it's all really fascinating stuff. I mean, I've been a fan of his for quite some time, as you can tell, but it's purely, for me, it's the value that you get out of it. And the other thing, and you mentioned this about being aware and slowing down, obviously the mental health benefits of being out in nature are amazing, but this just gives you that incentive to do what you said, to just slow down and really notice everything around you, which you would normally go about and just completely disregard.
Yeah, I went for a walk the other afternoon with my wife and my daughters, and one of them, she's studying biology at university, and as part of an assignment had to kind of note what species she saw outside in a specific location. And it was just a short walk. It was a cold, early winter day here in Ottawa, where I live in Canada. And, we saw chickadees, a woodpecker, sparrows, there were squirrels, we saw rabbit tracks, and this was just like a half an hour outside, on a cold, snowy day. So not hours and hours, and just, a quiet, slow walk. We noticed so much life and so many signs of activity. It was, again, another reminder that there's a heck of a lot going on if we take the time and slow down enough to notice it.
Absolutely. So clearly that comes with our recommendation, as do all of the books that we're covering today. And all books are available from the links in the show notes or from a bookseller near you. Okay, so that's Tristan Gooley, The Hidden Seasons. And the next book suggestion is one from your list. It's Only Drowning, written by David Litt, who was a speech writer for President Obama. Would you like to tell us a bit about this one?
Yeah, so David, as you said, he was a political writer. He worked in the White House during the Obama administration, and in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, found himself struggling with depression, and was really having a difficult time. And he lived in New Jersey and wasn't a particularly outdoorsy, active person, but had surfed a little bit and decided to try to do more surfing. For something to do. It's a very socially isolated sport, especially in New Jersey in the wintertime. And B, it has amazing, as you've talked with many guests about, an activity like that has amazing therapeutic properties. So David got into surfing and, got a little bit better at it and felt better and wanted to do more of it, but realized he needed a teacher. He needed somebody to learn from. And the best candidate to teach him how to surf well, or better at least, happened to be his brother-in-law. Now, David is a Democrat, progressive, urban, kind of politically attuned person. His brother-in-law, he describes as a right-wing, blue-collar electrician, listens to Joe Rogan, who's a libertarian podcaster in the United States and around the world, and doesn't necessarily agree with anything David has ever said. So two people kind of at opposite ends of the political spectrum. But his brother-in-law was a really good surfer. So the book is essentially about David learning how to surf and traveling to some pretty cool places with his brother-in-law. But beyond the surfing, it's about their relationship, and it's about how spending time together in this shared pursuit allowed them to find not common ground necessarily, but as David writes, find neutral ground. So they learned how to kind of be together and talk with one another and understand each other's perspective, even though they have really different perspectives. And the kind of the takeaway or the idea that he extrapolates from, a fairly intimate book about a friendship between two men is that we need to be able to see one another as human beings and talk to one another as human beings and understand somebody else's perspective. Not only even if, but especially if we don't agree with it. And surfing happened to be the mechanism through which they found this neutral ground. And it's also just like a really fun, funny, lively book full of lots of self-deprecating humor as a middle-aged man learns how to surf in big waves. But it's also an endearing and reaffirming book about, just how much is possible, how much change is possible, how much we can grow, and how we do have the capacity to learn and listen from one another.
And it's so important, that theme about bringing people, connecting across the divide. I remember Matt was into thrash metal and he was into Stephen Sondheim, which is quite a musical divergence. And there were some other themes in there as well, which, someone of my advanced age also identify with, which is learning things later on in life. I think he described learning surfing at the age of 35 as being like learning guitar on your deathbed. Certainly I can identify with that. And I think he also learnt some lessons from the act of surfing himself. And there was a quote from a teenage surf tutor that he had where he said, your trouble is you're thinking too much about whether or not you're going to make the wave. And that meant that he basically missed the wave. And I think we can all identify that if we've been out paddle surfing. You have to absolutely commit if you're going to get anywhere. You've got to take action and park that fear part of your brain and just go for it. And that is the place where good experiences happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many wonderful ideas and phrases in the book. One is kind of embracing the quote flower of fear, and how fear is not something to be avoided and to try to, eliminate in your life, but something to embrace in a sense, and to go through the various stages of fear. And as you said, commit to that moment of trying to catch this wave. And another idea is failure, and how, especially when you're learning how to do something as challenging as surfing, you're going to fail most of the time. But I think there's another surf instructor who tells them every time you go out and get pummeled by waves and washing machine and beat up in the water, even if you don't catch a wave, you're slightly less bad than you were the previous time. You're learning something. And I've certainly, I'm a still kind of beginner, maybe intermediate SUP surfer in the ocean, but I've spent a lot more time surfing river waves on my paddle boards. And I really took that book to heart this summer and finally became proficient on one of the standing waves we have in Ottawa that works year round. And for years, I went out and did not get it. And it's kind of a half-hour ordeal to take a shot at it because you have to paddle to the middle of the river, drift down, miss it or fall, get to shore, walk up carrying your board and try again. So I did this a few times every year for a few years, zero luck. But I started to do it more this year, kind of when I was reading this book, and started to get little tastes of what was possible and realized that, I've got butterflies every time I go out. I'm afraid every time, but I need to commit. I need to turn at the right moment, really dig in with the blade, bust out a couple power strokes, and then come what may. And suddenly things opened up and I was able to get on this wave. And, David writes about surfing as a path to curing his depression or helping him manage his mental health. I wasn't struggling to that degree, but, talk about a resource. It's there all the time. It's free. It's in the city where I live. And it just broadened my horizons in so many ways. So, not only the relationship, being a central kind of element to David's book, It's Only Drowning, but the act of surfing itself is just a profoundly fun and wonderful and liberating experience that I can certainly identify with.
Me too. Catching my first wave absolutely ruined me for flat water paddling. As a result, it didn't have the allure that it previously had. But it's a pretty magical and inspiring book, and it covers all sorts of different themes in there as well. So that is David Litt. It's Only Drowning, and that also comes recommended. I'm going to have to stop saying this, aren't I? It's going to get boring. Right. Okay. So moving on to the next book. This one is one that's written by a listener to the show, Rosemary Sales, and the book is called Life Map to Mongolia, Overcoming the Odds. And it's about an expedition she joined in Mongolia by canoe in spring 2025. So that is right. It was spring 2025 that she went on expedition. And so she's been on expedition this year and released a book, which in itself shows her resilient side. But what's so incredible about her journey is where she started everything from. And she had an absolutely horrendous upbringing by her nominal guardians when she was a child. She couldn't write a name until she was 12. She was essentially kept as a house prisoner and ultimately threatened to be trafficked once she reached a certain age. So she couldn't have had a more disadvantaged and upsetting upbringing. But since that horrendous start and those awful experiences, she's sort of really taken control of her learning and her development and developed a really strong connection with nature, which had a really positive psychological effect on her, and set up the first intergenerational forest school in the area that she lives. So, clearly connecting with nature has really helped her and allowed her to define herself and express herself. And here's a few words from the author herself.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Sales, and I'm here to talk about my book, Life Map to Mongolia, Overcoming the Odds. It's a true story. It's my story. It's a story about resilience, beating the system and overcoming the odds from a traumatic childhood where I was told I would never amount to anything, to travelling across the world. A journey that led me all the way to Mongolia, from paddling the River Wye in Hereford to the most scariest river I've ever seen, let alone canoed. We did it, and I have a hell of a story to share. Nature has always been where I go to recover. My greatest ideas come when I'm paddling. The paddle is my freedom, my key, the key to unlock any door I choose to open. The water is my playground, my office, my space. The river Delga Moron in Mongolia was wild and free, just like myself. Every paddle stroke was a step closer to regaining my voice, my strength, my power. The rapids were very scary. Some of the rapids were too dangerous. We had to line up and do portaging, which I found very fun. But it wasn't all about the river. It was about the nature, the culture, the community, the beautiful, breathtaking landscapes. And to any explorer out there, I hope you get a chance to see what I saw with my eyes. It's definitely worth a visit. The rivers and the land are untouched. I hope my book inspires people and it shows people there are alternative ways of healing rather than being in a small room for therapy or medication. The outdoors can give you so much, and that's what it's done for me, and I want to share this message. And I want to reach out especially to mothers out there. Yes, you can go on an adventure. Yes, you are worth it. I never thought I could be an explorer as a wife, a mother, and a full-time worker. But look at me now. I'm the first British woman to canoe an uncharted river in Mongolia, and then I wrote a book about it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So check out my website, www.whynotcommunity.com, and buy yourself a book. And don't forget to follow me on Why Not Community. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Rosemary's book yet. It sounds incredible, and I know I've encountered so many people over the years in my travels as a journalist and in my paddling adventures, and just heard so many stories of people whose outdoor activities, whether they're paddling or other forms of activity, have helped them overcome or manage the trauma they've experienced, in some cases extreme trauma. So it sounds, as hard as it is to read material like this, sometimes it sounds like a really powerful and inspiring book, and it sounds like my kind of book. But just seeing the name Mongolia reminded me of a Canadian writer, Colin Angus, an incredible adventurer and writer who has a book out called Lost in Mongolia, about a river trip down the Yenisei River, which is this massive, challenging river, one of the longest rivers in the world that barely anybody knows about. And it's been a few years since I read it, but hearing you mention Mongolia made me think I should go back to it. And for folks who might be interested in Colin and Julie Angus, he and his wife co-write some stuff. One of my favorite projects of theirs was a book called Road Trip, Rowed, where they started in Scotland, which is where Colin's family was originally from, and rowing with their bikes in their rowboat, and then taking the bikes out and converting the boat into a trailer. Cycling, they traveled from Scotland to Syria, which is where her father's family is from. So it's an incredible journey. Rivers, lakes, canals, the channel, lots of cycling as well, obviously. And Colin, he's the first person to ever circumnavigate the globe solely under human power. He did this maybe 22 years ago. So he's got a pretty impressive resume as a traveler, but, he's continued to do cool things, such as the Scotland to Syria trip.
Well, that is quite a journey. So those two books about Mongolia, and we just follow an episode of SUPfm podcast about Mongolia. So it's like London buses all arriving at once.
Mongolia is the next place to go. It's where it's at these days, apparently.
It's where all the cool kids go. Okay. So now I'd like to talk about a fantastic book, which is about a 12,000-mile SUP journey, which is entertaining, humorous, educational, and one where you really feel like you're travelling alongside the author and exploring with him. It's written by a thrusting young Canadian author called Dan Rubinstein. Dan, for those who haven't yet listened to episode 128, could you just explain your book in a nutshell?
Yeah, and a couple of lighthearted corrections. I don't know if 52 years old qualifies as young, and it's 1,200 miles, not as much as I would have loved to have paddled 12,000. That's a tad beyond my capacity at this point.
We'll fix that in the edit.
Okay. So Waterborne is rooted in a paddling journey I did in the summer of 2023 from my home in Ottawa to Montreal, New York City, Toronto, and then back to Ottawa. So 1,200 miles, 2,000 kilometers on a 14-foot inflatable SUP. And spent about 11 weeks paddling. I took a couple breaks during the trip. And my main purpose beyond all the paddling and camping and figuring out how to get into New York City and around the tip of Lake Ontario and challenging waterways like that, my main purpose was journalistic. I had arranged dozens of interviews with people whose lives or work revolve around water, and wanted to explore some of the benefits of spending time in blue space. So the physical health benefits, the psychological benefits, and the ecological benefits that kind of spin out when we spend time in, on, or around water. As all these riverkeeper and environmental stewardship organizations proclaim, to use it is to love it, and to love it is to want to protect it. So when we spend time in blue space, we want to take better care of blue space. So that was kind of my original goal and plan. But what happened along the way really exceeded my expectations. And, the paddling was fantastic. The journalism worked. But I met and spent time with dozens and dozens of strangers along the way. And these serendipitous encounters really became, I would say, the focus of my journey and the core or main theme of the book. They were so supportive and friendly and generous and welcoming and sharing of resources and their time and stories. And they were curious about what I was doing. And I really began to see water as a conduit to connection between people and as a way to help build or nurture community. And kind of like what David Litt writes about in It's Only Drowning, I saw water as a way to find neutral ground with people who you might not spend time with or agree with kind of in other realms of life. And it was an incredible experience. As I mentioned earlier, the writing was difficult. The book is out. People seem to like it. And I still like talking about it all these months later.
Well, there you go. And this is the good bit where you talk about it after all of the hard work. I'm not downplaying any of the marketing, but, I mean, those two massive stages of perspiration that had to go into producing it. I mean, you just, it's just incredible. So, I mean, what are your reflections about the journey now that you've sort of applied a little bit of distance to the actual journey itself, and then the writing as well, which I guess if you're doing that day in and day out, that sort of soon gets really, really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny being a nonfiction writer. Obviously, you have to finish at some point. You have to give a draft to your editor, and then you have to, work that through and get it off to the printer and get a book out into the world. But your wheels are still spinning. So I'm still making connections. I'm still having ideas and thoughts. I'm still reaching conclusions. I'm still coming across people or ideas that I didn't get a chance to report on or incorporate into the book. So it's finished, it's done, it exists, it's in the world. But, I think you always think, and this is maybe a bit of the neurotic writer, cliched persona that's very true. You always think it could have been more, it could have been better, it could have been different, even though there had to be a cutoff time. And as for the journey, one of the sort of nagging questions I had was, did I schedule and plan too much? Did I arrange too many meetings and interviews along the way and give myself, an itinerary that I tried to stick through? Should I have been a bit more free flowing and, gone more distance some days if I was feeling it and less distance other days if I met somebody or came across a place where I wanted to stay? I was able to do that some of the time, but a lot of the time I kind of had miles to make or a meeting to get to. And I don't know. I mean, it would have been nice to kind of fully submit to natural rhythms and let the wind and the water take me where I needed to be. But as I write in the book, most people live in the real world. And if you want to hook up with somebody for an interview or to report on a project that they're working on, you can't just say, I'll be there this month. You have to be a little bit more specific than that. So I kind of had to stick to the plan. So I think it worked out. It was a bit of a hybrid of, let's see what happens and let's try to stick to the schedule. But, I think that kind of debate or doubt will never fully go away.
Well, absolutely. And, I guess the relationship between the author and the reader will never know what you left out or what you could have put in. And as far as they're concerned, it's sort of perfect as it is. And I think one of the things that I've mentioned before, but which you do really well, and this is probably owing something to the journalism, is that, people without that journalistic background, perhaps sort of spend too much time in one area that ends up becoming really esoteric, whereas you manage to educate while keeping the entertainment and the interest and so on throughout. So it just flows from piece to piece, and you sort of achieve what I guess most authors are aiming for, which is that the reader comes out educated without even realizing that they're being educated. There's no pain as it goes into the brain. It's all fun and enjoyable. So that was quite an achievement.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, a bit of sugar to help the medicine go down. And, as a writer, I think about all of the amazing books and magazine articles that I've read and really enjoyed and kind of deconstructed why. And it's often that's descriptive writing and reporting. It's being introduced to places and people. I do, I do like the introspection, and I do like to know what's happening inside an author's heads and what their thoughts are and the kind of internal journey they're on. But I think as a reader, I'm more interested in what they're seeing and doing and the other people they happen to bump into if it's an adventure book or story. So I try to strike that balance. My editor, Jen Knock, a wonderful editor who's I've done 2 books with now, one about walking and the paddling book. Jen was kind of pushing me to include more of me and my internal monologue and internal journey. And I was kind of pulling back and wanting to be more kind of objective reporter. But that, that creative tension in the writer-editor relationship, that tug of war, I think got the book to the place where it needed to be, where she was happy with the revelations about myself, and I was happy with the balance. And I think, you're constantly, I'm trying not to be macho, trying not to be cliche, try to make fun of myself along the way, try to give the reader ways to identify with and understand me. So I'm a character as well, and I'm the character they're seeing the trip through. I'm the character they're seeing other people through. And if they like my voice, then they're going to keep reading. If they don't like me, they might not keep reading. So just you want to keep people sort of locked in with you along the way. And the second the reader, if they get bored, if they drift away, if they lose the narrative, so to speak, then they might not come back. So you really need to keep leaving these breadcrumbs. There's a wonderful term that I heard years ago, a newspaper reporter used in a lecture I went to, Reader Reward Unit, RRU. And you kind of want to sprinkle those RRUs throughout whatever you're writing. And there's enough of them, you're creating a path for the reader to follow. And they could be a joke, something funny, something dramatic, a clever turn of phrase, a dramatic observation, whatever. But you have enough RRUs, people are going to follow your story. So that's what I try to do.
Absolutely. And one of the most memorable ones is your mother, who was following and was definitely a character in the story as well, from her forensic mastery of the online was it monitoring of where you are and mapping and all of that sort of stuff. So that was one of those, definitely. But as you said, a very clear connection between water people who are featured throughout. And I think probably if you're listening to this podcast, you are a water person as well. So definitely another book that comes with my personal recommendation. Absolutely fabulous. And please go out and buy Dan's book, Waterborne, which is available at all good booksellers. And of course, Dan, I've got to ask you, after this magnificent opus, after these 2 books, what are you planning next? Have you got any concepts that you can share about what you might be doing?
Very good question. A lot of people are asking. The short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is, Waterborne is a bit of a sequel to Born to Walk, my first book. The word born, obviously, although it has an E in Waterborne, the word born carries through. So I think there could be a third book. These 2 books came out 10 years apart. I don't know if I want to wait 10 years until doing another one. I kind of needed 10 years to summon the energy and creative energy to do the paddling book. But it came out a little easier than the first one. So maybe I can cut that time frame in half. The smart money is going on something to do with flying. So Airborne is one of the working titles. My wife suggested Borneo. I've never been to Borneo. I don't know much about it, but maybe there's a way to end up. Maybe all roads will lead to Borneo in a couple of years, and I'll end up there. But I don't know at this point. But I love all forms of movement, and maybe there's a skiing book, a flying book, or something completely different. I don't know.
Born to play golf, Born to run. I think that might be already out there. I don't know, but I don't know whether you fancy that.
Yeah, I do run. Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, I think is the author's name, is fantastic. Never played golf, but I do play frisbee or disc golf. So maybe, and for a while, really wanted to write about it. So maybe there's a disc golf book in my future.
Well, you may well be the first to write a a long, meaningful non-fiction book about that. So you heard it here first, guys. Exclusive there from Dan Rubinstein.
Brief tangent. The founder, the guy who invented the Frisbee, Ed Hedrick, Steady Eddie, when he died a few years ago, he was cremated, and his ashes were put into a limited edition group of Frisbee that were produced somewhere in the United States. And was a very colorful, charismatic guy. And one of my favorite quotes from Steady Ed Hedrick was that Frisbees don't die; they just land on a roof and lay there, or something like that. So there's more to the Frisbee golf than one might think.
There you go. Well, we look forward to reading all about it. Right. Okay. So moving on to the next book, and this is another on your list, Dan, is A River Alive by British author Robert McFarlane. And this is his latest book. He's written a succession, and this one challenges the Western rationalist view of rivers as resources. And the central argument is that it's a crisis of imagination, and that rivers should really be seen as living beings. Should I just tell us a bit about this book?
So Robert McFarlane is, I would say, one of the best and most accomplished nature writers in the world. He's a professor at Cambridge. I think he's got more than 10 books out at this point, as well as collaborations with musicians and filmmakers and artists. He's really accomplished. I've had a hard time getting into his work in the past. Perhaps he's too erudite for me. His vocabulary is too large. I've read some of his work, and I knew it was good, but didn't really love it. So when I picked up Is a River Alive, I was not sure what would happen, and maybe it's my paddling mindset and proclivities. Maybe it's this book itself, but I was blown away by it. I would call it a masterpiece, and not using that word lightly. So in the book, Robert travels to three rivers, essentially, one in the cloud forests of Ecuador, one in a big city in India, and one in Innu territory in Quebec, here in eastern Canada. And he's exploring the rights of nature movement and a series of personhood campaigns for rivers, within which groups, largely indigenous, are attempting to achieve legal standing or legal status for rivers and other natural bodies. And the thinking is that if a corporation can be considered a person in the eyes of a law, if a corporation has the right to sue, then why not a river or a mountain or a forest? And, thinking about rivers as living entities reframes how we conceive of these waterways and the natural world writ large. And so there's some deep, heavy, important ideas at the core of this book, but it's also a really lively, not travel writing, but writing in different environments. He's trekking up, into the cloud forest in Ecuador. He's hanging out with a really incredible environmental activist in Chennai, India, a young man who had a really difficult upbringing, a really abusive upbringing, and has escape that and become whole through his love for nature and defending nature. And even in Chennai, India, where the pollution is terrible, there's still life in these rivers. And Robert documents how groups are trying to protect and sustain these waterways. And then the third kind of act, the third section of the book, is an epic river trip down a big whitewater river in eastern Canada. And it's he feels the lifeblood of the river. He feels its power and force. And this is a group, an Innu group, which is not only seeking this legal standing, but trying to prevent more hydro dams being built on this particular river, as have been done on neighboring rivers. And Robert just discovers just how powerful and eternal this river is. And I'm getting chills just talking about it and thinking about it. But it's also he writes beautifully and very cinematically, I found. So you can kind of picture the camera zooming into a place, and you're getting all the details and context. He introduces characters in a very cinematic way, and it was a pleasure and joy to read. And I've got my copy right here, and I don't reread books that often, but this might be one that I go back to not only once but a few times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he talks a bit about the UK and the rivers in the UK, I think the chemical acceptability of all rivers in the UK is zero. I mean, it's just phenomenally polluted over here, and I think at least there are degrees of campaigning to try and put things right. However, there was a decision that we made in the UK, which was, I think we're the only country in the world who sold off our utility water companies to private companies. And, you know, the result is that everything's gone in pension funds and very little put into the network, which means that we have to be very careful when I'm surfing locally, have a look at the Surfers Against Sewage app to see what sort of volume of sewage is currently sort of accompanying me on my waves, which isn't ideal. But I mean, the other point that Robert makes is that these rivers can recover. They're unbelievably sort of resilient when they are given the opportunity to do so. And you know, there's lots of examples of rivers, you know, particularly in Canada, which have recovered, you know, particularly their salmon populations after many years of you know, destruction.
Yeah, I mean, they're, you know, they'll be here when we're gone, right? No matter what we dump into them and build on them and around them, they're going to outlast us. And we need them to live. We need them to survive. You know, there's more environmental awareness, and there is an awakening underway. You know, all is not lost, but you know, there's an urgency to ecological protection, especially around waterways. And as much as I love the sections in the book in Ecuador and Canada, you know, in these amazing natural environments and these beautiful waterways, the middle section in Chennai, India, was equally powerful. And one of the scenes that stands out to me most, perhaps, is a group of volunteers had gathered to dig up turtle eggs and move them to a safer location. So when the hatchlings emerged, they had a chance to get out to the sea and survive. And, you know, this is a big, polluted, crowded city with a lot of destitute people. And Robert asks one of the volunteers, you know, why are you here volunteering, spending hours in the middle of the night, you know, trying to help a few turtles survive? And the man looks at him, and his answer is very simple. He says, for life. You know, so there's the recognition, even in this very degraded and difficult place to live, there's still a recognition that protecting nature, supporting nature is about life. And it's not just about that turtle or that river, that person. It's about all of us and everything sustaining itself.
Brilliant. So that is a River Alive by Robert McFarlane. And moving on now to a book which I have a degree of involvement in, Adventures on the Water, edited by Jo Moseley. And I think I'll just hand over to you quickly for your take on that one, Dan, because managed to get a copy sent.
Yeah, I was impressed how quickly it arrived here. That was really wonderful, making it all the way from the UK. I love this book a lot. I think, you know, it's called Adventures on the Water, but the title of Jo's introduction, The Joy of SUP, could have been the name of the book as well, because it's really about the beauty and wonders of paddleboarding specifically. Obviously, you know, I'm already part of the program, so would be drawn to a book like this. But you know, I love so many different elements in the book and so many different stories. I felt like I was meeting myself again and again and again. So, you know, one of the writers, and I'm just looking up her name here, Heather Peacock, writes about discovering SUP surfing, and it reminded me of me discovering SUP surfing. Brendan Prince, who circumnavigates Great Britain in his story, you know, I haven't done that, but I know a couple of things about long journeys and really identified with him. There were several stories of people overcoming trauma. Carolyn Dawson, I think is her last name, you know, doing the Amazon challenge despite some serious physical difficulties. Bill Behenna. I know you want to talk about his section, but you know, as a disabled man, realizing that he can still paddleboard and using a SUP to get out into nature by himself. You know, he loves paddleboarding for the same reasons I love it, but he's able to overcome so much, able to get out there. It's just so inspiring. So, you know, before I wrote my walking book, I had an idea to do an anthology anthology of walking stories by different writers. And my agent at the time, she said, "Great idea, I love it." And we had some great writers lined up, but she told me that anthologies don't sell well, so we kind of took a different tack. And I don't know if that's true or not, and especially in your side of the world. But I'm really glad that Jo persevered and got this book out, because it's the variety and range of the stories that I think really, really makes it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know some of the people who wrote for that. Mike is in there as well. But Will lives fairly close to me. Haven't been out on the water quite as much as I would have liked with him. But the first time we went out on an upper level of the Stour River, and it was absolutely beautiful, wonderful nature. And Will is quite an incredible individual. He was paralysed at quite an early age. So the fact that he has chosen a sport which requires, let's face it, quite a bit of faff for a paralysis below the shoulders, basically, the sort of kit he needs in order to get himself to the side of the water. But the other thing that Will does is he's a campaigner as well for accessible beaches. If you can imagine how difficult it is, for someone with Will's disability to be able to get down a sandy beach and onto the water, he's basically got a whole type of therapy denied to him. So he's taken a campaigning approach to beach accessibility. He did a survey this summer, and he's really turning it into a campaign with some movement. So I would certainly recommend that you catch up with all that Will is up to. But yeah, Brendan, incredible. Kaz, there are some fantastic paddlers on there, and it was I felt very blessed to be number.
I think your piece, Simon, is great as well, and I would have wanted to maybe hear more about the podcast, because I think this book is really a gathering of a community of British paddleboarders, and I think your show is really kind of the meeting place for a lot of people. And I would have wanted to maybe read more about the mechanics of putting the show together, and not necessarily you have a wonderful passage about paddling with a friend and being out in the water and why you love the sport. But I think you're doing a service through the show, and maybe if there's a sequel, then that would be my vote for what you might write about, is just the act of doing SUPfm and how it brings people together, because it's really again, it's a celebration of the joy of SUP. And I have a lot of friends, as I say, who are sit-down paddlers who canoe and kayak, and obviously those are amazing sports and can lead to some sublime experiences. But to me, there's something magical about SUP, and this book goes a long way towards capturing the range of variety of ways one could be on the water. A lot of the places where people paddle, I've been to. So I've spent a fair bit of time in Scotland over the years. And there's a few of the stories are set in Scotland. I've been to the Isle of Wight years ago. That was pre paddling, Dan. So I'd love to return to these places with a paddleboard and to get onto the water throughout the UK.
Well, when I walk down to our coast, I can see the Isle of Wight from the cliffs. The Isle of Wight's absolutely stunning. Just final thing to say about this book, and we mentioned her in passing, but of course Jo Moseley was the one who put all of this together, and this is Jo's third book, I think, and with all of them they've all been collaborative efforts. So her first one about Great Britain, it was all about her connecting with people. I think it might even have been during that COVID period, but she's very, very clever at connecting with people, and obviously writing about other people's experiences as well as her own. So, lovely book, lots of lovely people in there, and certainly lots of connections with the wider paddleboarding tribe.
I like in Jo's introduction to this book, she writes about the 5 kind of keys to wellness that paddleboarding facilitates. And I was, putting check marks beside them literally as I read, because I agree 100%. And I know one of her previous books was a sort of a paddleboarding guide to the UK. Is that right?
That's
and
right.
that's like, as a paddleboarder, when we travel with our boards or rent boards in places, often you find a kayak guide or a canoeing guide and you make do with that. So it's nice to have SUP specific literature to guide our travels. And, if I do make it over to the UK with the board, I can certainly see having that book with me as a handy resource to know where to go and what to expect along the way.
Absolutely. And as I've joked in the past to Jo, we have something in the UK, a sort of type of collection pattern. There was a guy called Monroe who wrote about the various different peaks within Scotland, and people go about collecting Monroes. So I've said that in the case of paddleboarding, people should collect Moseleys and go and paddle at all the locations that she's listed in the book. So so far, haven't had any takers for that, but maybe that's one for one of the listeners in the UK. Right, okay, so moving on to another book which was on your list, Dan, and that was The Theory of Water. And this is written by Leanne Betesamogan, I think, is the pronunciation of her name. Would you like to just tell us a bit about this one?
Leanne is a Anishinaabe, which is an indigenous group in Canada. She's a writer, a scholar, and an artist. And Theory of Water is, at times it's an academic book, I would say. There's some sort of heavy duty academic analysis. There's a lot of indigenous storytelling and mythology. There's a lot of personal reflection, but woven all together, it is what its title proclaims it to be. It's a theory of water, and water, or Nibi in her language, is so much more than, I think, I would say, anything else. I mean, it's the majority of our bodies. It's the majority of our planet. Every single living entity needs it to survive. She writes that, if we were in the same room, not doing a video call, and I breathe out, there's water droplets in my exhaust, and when you breathe in, you're inhaling that water. So water, or Nibi, literally connects us in a physical way. But beyond that, I think that the theory of water really places Nibi as part of a constellation of living things, and whether it's people or plants or animals or other natural features, in indigenous worldviews, there's no hierarchy. There's no pyramid with human beings at the top. In fact, establishing a hierarchy and thinking we're at the top is the cause of a lot of the problems in the world. So seeing the world, seeing life as part of this interconnected web with water at its core, really reframes how we go about living in the world. And if we're able to get to or towards that place, it changes our behavior, it changes our relationships with each other, with everything around us. And, we talk about environmental problems, we talk about societal problems, it's a matter of our perspective. Again, these natural systems will be here when we're gone. They're going to be here whether we respect them or not. We're the ones who are struggling. We're the ones who are in trouble. And, it's not really a doomsday book, but there's some heavy ideas at its core. One of which is that, especially, a couple hundred years ago, life was way more difficult than it is now. And people understood that life was tenuous and we needed each other. We needed the natural world to survive. Now we're somewhat isolated from that, and life is kind of easy, but it's artificially easy. It's predicated on cheap and abundant fossil fuel, which is causing all sorts of problems and may not endure all that much longer, right? So reframing how we think could allow us to go forward in a healthier and more sustainable way. So there's a lot going on there. It's a difficult book to read. It's a dense book to read, but I think the ideas that Leanne writes about are powerful and important and beautiful. And one last thing in my kind of overview is that indigenous peoples historically, traditionally, had a more intimate relationship with natural systems, with water, with Nibi, and they talked to it. It was just another living thing, and they had this kind of constant dialogue with it. They talked to it, they listened to it, they learned from it, and that's part of the ongoing conversation we've had today about all of these books. Going back to Tristan Gooley, is listening to and learning from water and other natural features is a pretty damn important thing.
Absolutely. And I can see the threads from this book running through pretty much all the other books that we've talked about today, which all sort of present the love of water or love of nature in a slightly different way. So obviously you've got the David Litt book, which is about going across divides and connections and so on. So that is something that sort of occurs throughout all of the books, connections with nature, being mindful, really really noticing, which obviously is the indigenous people who contributed, or, in Leanne's book, but also from Robert Macfarlane. All of those aspects are all shared throughout all of these conversations. So there is quite a bit of commonality between all of the books that we've discussed today, including yours, which pulls all of it in, really, because you talked about the blue mind effects, the effects on the indigenous communities, the ecology, the friendship, the relationships. It ties
Yeah,
everything together,
I happened to write a kind of a joint review of Theory of Water and Is a River Alive for a Canadian literary magazine, and in a sense, they're different books. You have a Cambridge scholar, writing a big book about rivers around the world, and then a Canadian academic, with perhaps a smaller platform, writing, a less readable book in a sense, but there's a lot of commonality between them. And I try to incorporate indigenous perspectives and worldviews in Waterborne as a journalist, spending time in indigenous communities and with indigenous peoples and reporting on their perspectives. So, not appropriating their voices and languages, but incorporating their ideas into what I write. And I think that's vitally important. I mean, maybe it's perceived as cliched thinking to think of traditional indigenous ways as kind of a higher standard and something that's maybe unrealistic these days, but it's really at the core of a symbiotic sustainable existence, is having respect for everything and everybody around you and not putting yourself on a pedestal. And I think we can all learn from these ideas. And in Theory of Water, Leanne Simpson writes about the rights of nature movement, and that's part of it too. So, on one hand, it's academic or traditional indigenous storytelling, but there's a real live current living case to be made for, our courts can do this. And, think about the protection, say, the rivers in the UK would be afforded if they were given legal personage status, and if the courts recognize that they have a right to flow and be clean and not be dammed and not be taken away from the people and communities along their banks, right? What a world that would be.
Absolutely. And you only care for something if you're aware of it. And I think as paddleboarders, we have a very special perspective, standing high on the water and looking farther to the wildlife and the water. And, certainly from my time on the water, I've got a huge amount of ease and mindfulness and relaxation at times where I've really needed it. So, I think that's something that we all share. Dan, thank you so much for your time. It's been great speaking to you about these fantastic books. All of the links to them will be in the show notes, and we hope that you enjoy either gifting them or reading them yourself. But regardless of which one you choose, you will get a fabulous benefit from immersing yourself in these books. And it's been a lovely experience, one that hopefully we'll be back with the book club episode in 2026. But thank you again, Dan, for appearing with us. Waterborne is Dan's book. 1,200 miles, not 12,000 miles, although that might be the sequel. We don't know at this point, either that or Frisbee Golf. But really appreciate your time, Dan. And
thank you so much, Simon. And I was about to say, hopefully the next time we talk, we're on paddle boards on a river, lake, or ocean, somewhere in this great big blue world.
A huge thank you to Dan Rubinstein for joining me once again, and to you for listening all the way to the end. Your support really keeps this podcast afloat, and the best way you can support it is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It really helps more paddlers to discover the SUPfm podcast, and you can sign up to our newsletter at supfmpodcast.com/list to stay up to date with episodes and events. And of course, a massive thanks to our season sponsors, Starboard, Oscar Propulsion and Paddle UK. And their support helps us to bring these conversations to you. And all their links and details are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at SUPfm Podcast so you never miss an episode. And until next time, take care and we'll see you on the water.